everybody? I'm blessed and free. Welcome back to another episode of DOC TV. So, man, I got a great guest to shed some light on what he's went through in his life. He actually has a short documentary on Amazon Prime. If you guys haven't checked it out, go ahead and check that out. It's called Conviction. This guy has done a lot of time, but I'm going to let him tell you more about that story. So, man, why don't you introduce your name and where you're from to the audience at home?
Yeah, my name's Jeffery Deskovic. I grew up in Peekskill County in Westchester. I'm currently in the Bronx in New York.
Okay, awesome. So, what was life like for you growing up in the Bronx?
Well, I grew up in Peekskill. I moved to the Bronx later on as an adult. But in
Okay,
terms of how life was when I grew up, Peekskill was a small city, population of approximately 25,000 people. I would say it was that I would say that it was ethnically diverse, and it was middle class. So I was kind of like growing up before I went to high school, and even through summer high school, I was kind of like the life of the party in the sense that the apartment complex that I grew up at and in the surrounding areas, there were a lot of kids there, and pretty much whatever me or another kid would suggest would be what we would do. If we were going to ride bikes or go swimming, play basketball, play stickball, play Monopoly, go hit up the video game store, play basketball, dodgeball, whatever sport it was. We even invented a few. That would be kind of what we did. We invented this interesting way of playing. We played baseball with a tennis racket and a tennis ball. In a certain way, you had to pitch. You had to pitch in a way where the ball bounced once before it went over home plate.
oh wow, okay, yeah, that's definitely interesting. I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, you would have to get someone out real quick, and we'll get the importance of it. To get someone out, you could throw the ball to like the basement on first, second, third. But if you're rounded third and we're coming home, the defender was able to hit you with the tennis ball as a way of getting you out on
Oh,
the way
okay.
home when trying to score. Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds like, for what it's worth, that you had a pretty normal childhood growing up in New York. Was that fair to say?
Fair to say.
Okay. So, well, obviously you're on DOC TV. So usually people come on this channel that have been to prison or fighting cases or whatever the case is. So, well, when was the arrest and how did that go down when you got introduced into the jail and prison system?
Yeah, that was 1990. I was 16 years old, and I was arrested for a murder and rape of a high school classmate that I barely knew. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high by basis.
What was going through your head when you're in school one day and the next day you're getting arrested for a murder and a rape?
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't that. Well, it was a little bit more prolonged than that. So first, the girl was missing, and there was an announcement over the PA system. Has anyone seen? Anyone seen Angela? Contact the principal. And a few days, her body was found a couple of days later. And shortly thereafter, on my way to school, the Peekskill police intercepted me on the way to high school, and they told me they wanted me to come down to the police station with them they want me to be helpful to them in reference to her murder and rape, solving it. And I told them, well, I don't know anything about it, so I don't see how I could possibly be helpful to you. But they insisted they wanted me to be helpful to them, and eventually they convinced me to go down to the police station. And
Okay.
so for the next 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me in which half the time they would talk to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. It would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear any rumors. Stop in from time to time. Before I was a teenager, I wanted to be a cop when I grew up. So this cat and mouse game where they would pretend like, Jeff is a junior detective helper theme along my age, 16, was how they pulled the wool over my eyes. And every time they would push too hard when talking to me as a suspect, and I would get scared and want to leave, that's when Jeff as the junior detective helper would come in. So they told me that I got on the police radar by three factors. So, firstly, they interviewed a lot of people, students from the high school, and because and in the high school I was quiet to myself, the kids were older than me by like a year, and I really wasn't into drinking beer and going to parties and chasing girls. I was more like playing video games and other stuff. So, and I didn't play organized sports, so I didn't fit in high school. So I had that double life dynamic, and so because I was quiet into myself, that made me stick out, and the kids told the police, well, talk to him. I guess people that stick out commit heinous crimes. That's the thinking. Secondly, I was a sensitive kid, and so this was my first real brush with death, and so I was emotional, and the cops thought that my emotional reaction was disproportionate to what my actual relationship with the victim was, which was, as I mentioned, really no relationship. So they thought that was some kind of outward sign that I was sorry for what I had done.
So you
And
were being questioned during this time and you started crying because you were scared probably. And they automatically thought you're crying because you got caught and now you're going to go to jail.
That's true, but also when I went to like the wake and to the funeral, I was a little emotional there also. And so it was
Oh,
some of that. It wasn't just crying while interaction with the police.
okay.
Third reinforcing factor is they got a psychological profile from the New York Police Department because Peekskill wasn't experienced in investigating murders, and that profile purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that, and so it's kind of a reinforcing factor on their end.
Wow.
And so eventually they told me that they got me to agree to take a lie detector test by telling me they had some new information in the file and they wanted to share that with me. And that would allow me to be more helpful to them. But I would have to pass a polygraph test first. And so the next day, rather than go to school, I went to the police station. My mother and grandmother thought I was in school, so they didn't call around looking for me. And the cops drove me across county lines, 40 minutes away by car from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, to town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So had no independent way of leaving. I had no attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat. They gave me countless cups of coffee, put me in a small room, attached me to the polygraph machine, and then they launched into their third degree tactics. So they invaded my personal space. They raised their voice at me. They kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And I was really frightening. And they kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Eventually, the polygraphist said, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. And we just want you to verbally confirm it. So when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. And then the cop who had been pretending to be my friend came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, that he had been holding them off but couldn't do so any longer, that I had to help myself. And then he added, well, look, just tell them what they want to hear. They'll stop what they're doing. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I just wanted to get the hell out of there, man. And
Right.
I made up a story based on information they gave me in the course of the interrogation. And, by the time it was all said and done, I collapsed onto the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was, in fact, arrested for a murder and rape.
Wow. So after that had happened, what were their attitudes after you had stopped crying and got up off the floor? Did they just handcuff you and take you straight to jail from there?
They handcuffed me and took me to the police station, but they still didn't tell me that I was under arrest. And I asked them, well, why are you handcuffing me? You told me you wasn't going to arrest me. And they just said, safety. And then they brought me safety. They brought me to the police station and they gave me pizza to eat. And I'm eating pizza, and periodically I'm interrupted by officers carrying out different part of the processing. And when it got down to the fingerprinting, he put my hands full of ink to do it. And that kind of pissed me off. And I said to one of the officer detectives, I'm trying to eat pizza. Now I got ink all over my hands. What's going on? And he said, well, he has a right to do that. And I said, what do you mean he has a right to do that? And he said, yeah, he has a right to do that. You're being arrested. You're being charged with the crime. And it was at that moment that I realized that I was under arrest. But before that, I didn't know.
So after that had happened, then what was the next step after he said that? Like, did they finally transport you into
Yeah,
an actual jail?
they did. They transported me to a jail. where I was very depressed and suicidal. They kept me in the mental health wing of the county jail. I was there for about 35 days, and then I got bailed out. My mother's boyfriend was pretty well to do. He was a businessman, and he put up some property, and so I got bailed out. But you know, I felt my life was over. I thought when I got bailed out, I was going to go back to my life, but there was never going to be any going back. I was a hated figure in Peekskill. Everybody thought that I committed this murder and rape. I mean, it was the talk of the town. I was hated. The fact that I had falsely confessed, the confession, if it's, everyone believed I was guilty, I wasn't allowed to go back to the high school. Kids hated me, and parents wouldn't allow the few friends that didn't dislike me, wouldn't allow them to play with me. And so I wound up making another suicide attempt. I took a entire bottle of extra strength Tylenol and I went to sleep. And I intended never to wake up, but I did. And they saved me, and I was involuntarily hospitalized for 6 months. And at some point after that, they let me out, and the court proceedings commenced. There was a DNA test that came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen found in and around the victim didn't match me, and that really should have ended the case. But the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud and falsely claimed that he said that he found medical evidence showing that the victim had been promiscuous, and that's what allowed the prosecutor to argue, well, just because the DNA doesn't match me, that doesn't mean he didn't do the murder and rape. That semen could have just been from yet another person who slept with the victim. Taking it a step further, he named another youth by name that he claimed that slept with the victim, but he never set the proper evidentiary foundation. He never had a DNA test performed. He didn't even call this other youth as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. At the same time, my another thing is that when the DNA didn't match me, the police went back in the field and they interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one way or another, and all of them told the police that she didn't have any boyfriend. There was no consensual sex, but the cops purposely did not document any of those witness interviews, so we never knew about that. And plus, the cops falsely said that I told them that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not. And they only came out with that after the DNA didn't match me. That wasn't in any of their prior police reports. Now, on the
So real
defense,
quick,
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, you're fine. So why do you think that they chose to lie and not look into other options as to who could have done this? And what do you think they just focused all their attention on you because they figured, well, we already got him to confess, so it should be a slam dunk case?
Well, well, I was actually the third suspect. Initially, they looked at the victim's stepfather, but he hired a retired NYPD officer as a detective to investigate the crime, and that convinced them that he didn't have anything to do with it. Then they moved on to another youth, but he had a stepdad in the home who stepped up for him and got him an attorney. I didn't have a stepfather in the room, so that's how they moved on to me. Once they got me to confess, I do believe that, as you said, it was at that point that they thought, well, we got a slam dunk case. Let's keep going. Let me just add one thing as to my defense attorney. I had a public defender. I couldn't afford a private lawyer. I mean, they wanted $50,000 just as a retainer, and we ain't have that kind of money.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, who has that lying around for a retainer? So this public defender essentially didn't defend me. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball with one of my friends. He never cross-examined the medical examiner to discredit him. He rarely met with me. Whenever I tried to tell him I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that it proved that the confession was coerced and false. He never should have represented me because of a conflict. So this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that public defender agency. And that prevented us from calling him as a witness. It prevented the defense from asking him for a sample. And lastly, he wouldn't allow me to testify. So when I was interrogated, it wasn't videotaped or audio taped, and there was no signed confession. It was just a cop's word, and they left the threat and false promise out of their story. So my lawyer wouldn't allow me to testify to add those facts in. So when you added it all up together, I was wrongfully convicted and given a 15 to life sentence, which I was sent to a men's maximum security prison to serve.
Okay, so that's really what I want to get into because, you know, I've been to prison. I know how prison works. And for that crime, you know, not murder, you're good on it.
Right. That's
You
true.
know,
Yes,
that's
that's
true.
true.
You're kind of looked up to really because people think
Yes.
you're gonna murder them, so they don't try you. But so when you went in with the rape charge, like did anybody before you actually got transferred say, hey man, like you're gonna have a rough time because of that charge? Or did you already
Yes.
know that?
Well, I already knew that because I had some difficulties in the county jail because of that.
Okay.
But I also had trouble in the state prison. I mean, there were times where I was beat up. There was many times I was beat up. I mean, I'm 17 years old, and I was living I wasn't no street kid. And I'm in a maximum men's maximum security prison. I mean, what am I going to do against fully grown men? I got this bullseye on my back, so I was beat up plenty of times, and one time I almost lost my life.
So what were they? How did they find out about your charge? Like, did you?
Well,
Did
it's a combination of a combination of media coverage. I mean, this was a really high profile case, so
they? Okay.
that, and then whenever some prisoners would get transferred to the prisons where I was at, that were from the same county, and they were aware of my case. But another issue is that whenever you appeal a case, that decision comes out in the law books, and those law books are in the prison law library. And so some of the prisoners discovered my case in the prison law library as well. And later on, when the internet got around, um, people on the outside, one prisoner could tell someone on the outside,
Right.
I want to know what this guy is in prison for. Go to the Department of Correction website and look it up and let me know.
Right. Right.
So it was all of those factors.
Considering you saying like you weren't a street kid, obviously. You know, you kind of grew up normal from what we said before. What was going through your head, like, you know, your second, third, fourth month in prison, and now you're really starting to realize in your head like this is going to be my home for, you know, you don't know, like what were you going through mentally, spiritually? Obviously you were getting beat up, so physically you don't even need to answer that question, but you know, for the mental and spiritual part, like what was going on? Because I know you said you were suicidal, so how was that
Yeah.
for you?
So depression, more, I was fighting depression, and and I always thought about suicide. That was always in my mind here and there. I had to keep fighting those feelings off, along with feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up. Um, at times, so there was that. But then also, but another thing to understand is that in my mind, I was kind of naive, so I didn't think I was doing a 15 to life sentence. I felt I was just doing a year or two until the next until the next appeal happened, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I believed in the system, and I naively thought that the higher up the court system you went, the better, the more accurate and learned the judges were. So I kind of was living from appeal to appeal. So that took me through 11 years. But the other thing I want to mention to you is, I mean, I found things to throw myself into mentally. I mean, I didn't waste my time with any of the prison programs that, didn't mean anything. I took things that had some kind of potential usage on the outside. Like I did GED in college before they took the schooling away. I got the associates. I took various trades. I did that. I used to learn the law because I didn't trust the lawyer to defend me anymore. So I
Yeah,
wanted to, I
I
used
don't blame you on that one.
to, yeah.
I
So
wouldn't trust anybody anymore, let alone
uh,
the attorney.
I agree. And I also used to collect articles about other people that were exonerated to try to use it as motivation to keep going and try to figure out who helped them and what route did they take. So there was that. And then from 1998 forward to 2006, I read 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week. So I kept my mind busy. When if I wasn't doing law work or writing for help, I was reading nonfiction books. And then the last thing I'll mention is there was this elaborate delusion that I engaged in. in which when I would play basketball or chess or ping pong, I would pretend like if I was a professional player, and so was everyone else. You know, I even had this worked out. So the Armory, that was home games, and the gym, that was on the road. You know, and but it wasn't like kids playing in the park. You know, this was more like a mental survival mechanism. I needed to leave the prison for a couple of hours,
Yeah.
and if I deluded myself that way, I used to listen to sports talk radio, but it wasn't listening to sports talk radio. It was really like a lifeline to the outside. So I
I
engaged
got
in
you.
all of those things, man. And I try to normalize the madness. Like, you know, like if it's normal, if you're going to use the phone to have to call collect, and it's not the prison guards, it's the correction officers, and it's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent. And I'm not going on a prison assignment in the morning, in the afternoon, I'm going to school or I'm going to work. So all of those things.
So you were like kind of, you went delusional in some areas to,
Yes,
yes.
I
That's
did.
what
And when yeah. You know, on an unrelated note, but somewhat tied in, you know, at times I couldn't believe that I was actually there. I was questioning my own senses. Like, am I really found guilty and sent into prison for something I didn't do? And I would think about the sequence of events that happened that culminated into that result, and the odds of any one of them happening seemed to be long, much less to be in combination. So half the time I couldn't believe I was actually there.
how many prisons did you go to in your time when you were in?
Let's see, downstate, Elmira, Shawangunk, Eastern, and Sing Sing. Five. I was in five prisons. Most of my time I spent in Elmira. I was there three different times where they transfer me from there to another prison and back again. So that happens in there three times. So altogether, five prisons
Okay.
and
So,
five prisons in 16 years.
wow.
So I lost seven appeals, you know, and I also got turned down for parole because I
Wow.
maintained my innocence instead of taking responsibility and expressing remorse, which is what the parole board wanted to hear.
So what would you say out of the whole time and the amount of prisons you went to was the craziest prison that you went to?
I would say Elmira, where I spent most of the time. There was three or four stabbings or cuttings every day. There was plenty of violence that did not involve weapons, and there was a lot of gang activity. So, taken cumulatively, there was a general environment of violence and adrenaline that permeated the air. I mean, you had to be on point at all times, and you have to be ready to go on a moment's notice. Meaning, you got to be ready to just defend yourself and go for yours at a moment's notice over nothing.
Okay. So what, I mean, when you say that was the violent camp, was there a situation or an episode that, you saw with your own eyes that you were just like blown away by the level of intensity of it?
Yeah, there was an incident where this guy was attacked by two people, and both of them had shanks, which is like a homemade prison knife, and his lung got punctured. His lung got punctured, but on that particular time, thank God, the guards were professional and fast on that rare occasion. They rushed him to the hospital and they managed to save his life, but he almost died from that. I mean, that was one thing. And I remember that I was on a basketball court, and this guy was walking rather fast across the from one part of the armory to another, and as he walked past me, I saw that his face was bleeding. It was cut, and he was moving fast to try to get to his assailant before the guards discovered that he was hurt. He wanted to try to get his revenge. That was wild and crazy to me too.
What did you witness as far as the guards and the corruption that goes on in the prison system?
Yeah, well, for example, sometimes the guards would put enemies, people that had been in a fight, they would put them in the same cage that they'd be in trouble because they got caught for their fight, or they might not have got caught, but the administration suspects that they were fighting, so they were kept in their cell while investigation goes on. But while that's happening, you're still entitled to 1 hour recreation. So the guards would put enemies or suspected enemies into the same small caged area so that they could fight for their entertainment.
Wow.
So I
Yeah.
saw that, and sometimes the guards were my obstacles because there were a few times when the guards told the other prisoners that I was a rapo, that I was in there for the rape, you know, with the murder, and hoping that the other prisoners would attack me. Now, the last thing I'll mention quickly is I saw sometimes I saw the correction officers. when violence was happening, it's their job to break it up. And sometimes they would they would look the other way, literally, and walk in the opposite direction because they didn't want to break anything up and take a chance of being hurt. They didn't want to file no paperwork afterwards. So I saw that. So I didn't think any of those things were right.
Crazy. So, all right. So you're in obviously this crazy prison. There's a lot of stuff going on. Now, did you have, I know with the things you were talking about earlier about, reading books, going to the law library, was there anybody you were communicating with where you felt like a sense of society that you had to be like you were a part of?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, there were a few. I mean, in general, as you know, I mean, in prison, you don't got no friends in prison in general, but right, but but you have people you associate with, and you keep people within 2 arms length if you determine there. So that's the general rule, right? But there's always
Right.
exceptions to the rule. So I broke the rule at times with some people. I would say one of the closest relationships I had was with another prisoner who was wrongfully convicted also on a similar case. It was also a false confession case. And we kept each other going for 13 and a half years. I mean, once his name was Frank Sterling. He was doing time for a murder. And once every 6 weeks, we would get together in the yard. And half the conversation was about keeping each other going morale wise. And the other half the time, we were just brainstorming about what the next move. I mean, if I could illustrate, and I'll do a little gallows humor. I mean, the conversation might go something like this: did you hear about the latest Court of Appeals decision? No, no. What was it? What was it? And are they applying it to old cases? And Frank, did you read about the latest wrongful conviction book? No, no, no. But the place that published it, do they have contact information for the author? And did you hear about the latest exoneration? No, no. But who represented them and how'd they get out? So we would just be brainstorming. What are we going to? What's our next move? Try to overturn the conviction. Get the hell out of there. Regain our freedom. We both did. I was exonerated after 16 years.
All right. So obviously, just in case that everybody that's watching this didn't catch that, you are innocent. You were exonerated.
Yes.
But what I want to know is how did that go down? Because I'm sure, you're in prison and you got appeals and they're constantly being denied and you're not guilty. So you're not going to talk about like you are at the parole hearing. How did it go when, you finally found out like, man, I am going to be walking out of this prison a free man?